Okay, so why Jedi should meditate? Okay, so maybe so that they can lift rocks and things, fancy things like this. But are we really talking about Jedi as in our lightsaber wielding warriors of a space age future? So what is Jedi? What are we referring to? So this is an acronym that actually stands for Justice, Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. I mean, it wasn't by accident that they chose to arrange this acronym to sound like Jedi from the Star Wars movies, because that's an inspiring archetype. I mean, the Jedi, what are they? They're kind of guardians of justice, and they're ready to not just talk about it, they're ready to protect with their warrior energy. No, so taking a stand, doing something concrete, does require kind of awakening a sort of heroic, sort of fighting spirit in us. And that's actually, I'm going to show in a minute how that is actually very integrally connected to spiritual growth. So yeah, the Jedi in equality, diversity, and inclusion has been around for a while, but there was a need to also include justice, that otherwise the diversity movement, the inclusion movement can turn into a sort of tokenism where in order to make the majority feel more comfortable, oh, we're being inclusive, oh, we have a few people that are of color or that have disabilities, and those people sometimes felt like, yeah, okay, but it's just like to make you feel better. But what about actually creating more change in society so that that's not even an issue anymore? So justice is looking also at changing structures, at changing the more embedded forms of exclusion, and going beyond just a superficial kind of political correctness attitude towards these issues. So I think it's a good addition. Plus, it also makes a really cool acronym. So win-win. And yeah, a little bit more going into depth into the acronym. So justice, meaning dismantling barriers to resources and opportunities in society so that all individuals and communities can live a full and dignified life. Equity means allocating resources to ensure everyone has access to the same opportunities. Equity recognizes that advantages and barriers, the isms, exist. So we also talk about isms in Neohumanism and the different forms of sentiment, geo-sentiments, socio-sentiments that exist, and that it's important to recognize, and that it's because of the value that society gives to that some people end up with relative advantages and some people with disadvantages. So how can we create a more even playing field so everybody has access to equal opportunities? Which doesn't mean equal treatment. I will illustrate that in a moment. Diversity, all the differences between us based on which we experience advantages or encounter barriers to opportunities. Diversity isn't just about racial differences. So diversity can, in the words of our founder, Sri Sri Anandamurti Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, his attitude was diversity creates, it's like having a flower bouquet that is more beautiful because it has a variety of flowers in it. So diversity enriches our experience. And it is indeed about making sure all types of voices are heard, not just different ethnicities, but also different abilities, different genders. So the more diverse a group is, the more wisdom will be present in the collective mind, because you have then a variety of viewpoints, and that only enriches its wisdom. So inclusion, fostering a sense of belonging by centering, valuing, and amplifying the voices, perspectives, and styles of those who experience more barriers based on their identities. So inclusion is about not just integrating people that are different, but actually thinking, what are we doing to create the type of environment that will be welcoming and in which they can fully participate and fully express? And so this often means adapting the environments that we have in order to facilitate that. Not just assuming that the person who is in a minority position has to adapt themselves to fit into that circumstance or environment, but that the environment itself, created both by attitudes, but also even physical barriers, can be there if you're a person with disabilities. So how can the environment itself be such that everybody can participate fully? This is a quote from our founder, Sri Sri Anandamurti. So, you who want to be real human beings must continue your sadhana, spiritual practice, in your inner life and strive ceaselessly for God realization. And with equal effort, you must see to it that no irrational, undesirable, or detrimental theory is propagated in the external world, which can harmfully influence the human mind. You must be ever vigilant in this regard. That is why I told you to be vocal against all sorts of injustice. So this is a quite clear directive. We are not just to see evil and tolerate it and do nothing. We are to find our voice and to find our way of actively working to remove injustices and to be allies and support to those who are facing different forms of injustice. This is to be done with equal effort. So we have an idea in the particular spiritual tradition that Sri Sri Anandamurti gave us. There is this idea of both the balance between the internal search for self-realization and the external expression of that through an attitude of service. And that attitude of service, it can also be directed internally towards the Supreme Entity. And in the end, actually, that's how everything starts nourishing the spiritual practice, is to realize that service to the creation isn't just an externalizing thing. It is something that when we have the right perspective on it, we serve the creation as a manifestation of that Supreme Entity. And it is also something that is building our ability to break through all obstacles internally as well. In fact, there's 3 stages of spiritual evolution. And the first stage is called Shakta. And what is this? I'm going to first read the quote and then I'll explain a bit. So, who is a Shakta? A Shakta is one who is determined to awaken his or her cognitive faculty and fight against the negative influence of the static principle. So we'll just pause here for a second. So to awaken your intelligence, to awaken your ability, your rational ability to understand the static influence, the negative influence of the degenerating principle, which pulls towards selfishness, towards not only self-interest on an individual level, but also group, to recognize that, to be able to see it, and to awaken our ability to also fight against it. So such a person struggles ceaselessly against psychic impurities and physical ailments in individual life, and against social evils and economic disparity in collective life. Okay, so there is a struggle. That means to struggle to eliminate all of your negative tendencies internally, but also at the same time to awaken that heroic warrior within you that works to fight against social evils and economic disparities. And we have lots of opportunities for that. Our world is still quite full of injustice, so we have lots of opportunities for spiritual growth. A Shakta is not afraid of the crushing load of unhappiness in life and never surrenders to pessimism, but fights against the miseries of life with revolutionary zeal. Okay. So revolutionary, what does that mean? It means if there's a direct path towards change, you take the shortest and most direct path rather than a more slow evolutionary or reactionary or, reformist type of approach. No, you see what can be done? Just do it. And so the first stage of sadhana, one has to become a Shakta in order to acquire adequate Shakti. So why do we need Shakti? Because moving along the path of spirituality requires a tremendous amount of determination and fighting spirit. And so when we engage in social transformation, when we actually engage in that, that is actually awakening that courageous, valorous, vigorous kind of attitude. And it's giving it a very constructive outlet in order to, do something at the same time that collectively elevates the whole of our society. And when you're doing that, you are not only gaining power, you could say, for yourself and your ability to have that confidence and that drive and that determination, but you are also doing good in the world. And so you become one of the instruments of that grace, one of the instruments of that force for good, of that force for evolution, that force for change on the planet. And that is incredibly important. Doing that, starting to feel that you are one of the channels for that evolution towards good, that evolution towards more sensitivity, more inclusion, more justice. All of that is the upward trend of the collective mind. We are evolving individually, but we are not separate from the collective. Our individual evolution is completely intertwined with the collective evolution. And so when we're doing that, we are elevating not only ourselves, but we're also elevating and being elevated by the collective. Now, this process is inevitably going to be one that also challenges us to get out of our comfort zones. And that's another reason why it is so useful in spiritual practice, because the comfort zone is dominated by the static principle. It's what keeps us in safety. There we are safe and in control, and we kind of are, everything's predictable in life. But that's not a space of a lot of growth and change and transformation. It's a pretty slowed down state, actually. So, when you're going to step out of that comfort zone, the first zone that you kind of have to overcome is fearfulness. It's where you're worried about what other people will think about you, how they'll judge you. You kind of look for excuses to stay in that comfort zone. You don't have enough self-confidence. But the beautiful thing is that as soon as you move beyond that fear zone, you are developing the skills, the strength to not be affected by the external world, to listen to the static tendency that wants to find excuses, and you're building your self-confidence. All of this, again, you're gaining Shakti, you're gaining that power, that drive, that force to be able to move forward in the transformational process of spiritual growth. This brings you into your learning zone. And that's where you are dealing with challenges and problems. You're acquiring new skills. You're expanding your comfort zone. You're becoming comfortable in a broader zone. And as you're learning, you're also growing. And that growth is towards finding purpose, living your dreams, setting new, higher and higher goals, and realizing your aspirations. So it's a very virtuous circle. Once you start expanding beyond, you start gaining experiences that encourage you to keep expanding. Now, here we also have to be a bit aware, though, that if we go too far too fast, we can enter into something called the panic zone. So the panic zone wasn't illustrated on this particular diagram, but the panic zone is if we go way far out of our comfort zone, so far out that we're not growing or learning, we're just completely frozen and shut down in our panic zone. So, that's not helpful either. We shouldn't throw ourselves so far out that we go into a panic zone. We need to be honest with ourselves about finding that growing edge where we are developing, where we are growing, where we're expanding, but we're not shutting down, where there's still that creative kind of discovery. And so sometimes that means breaking it down into smaller steps. If you're not comfortable becoming an activist, doesn't mean you have to go out and lead 100 people. If you can do that, great. But, most of us need a lot more smaller steps before we would feel comfortable taking on more visible types of leadership. So, that means looking around and seeing who in my community is active, who is doing stuff for, especially because we're talking about Jedi today, so about justice, equality, diversity, etc. Who's doing that work? Who could inspire me? Who could be a mentor for me? Because you can find another organization or another group that's doing something you also are passionate about and just volunteer. See what they need. Just call them up and say, I'm interested in what you're doing. I also want to learn and I want to develop and I want to support and amplify what you're doing. How can I help? And I'm sure you'll find some way to be involved. If you can't be involved directly, you can also start to put your money where your heart is. So another way of engaging in social change, if you're not yet ready to do direct volunteering, or maybe you simply don't have time, that doesn't mean that you just have to wait for others to do it. You still can be an important part of social change by financing it, by using your by simplifying your own needs, which is also a spiritual practice. How can I simplify my needs? Not to be more stingy, and to accumulate more resources for some rainy day. No, I simplify my needs, make a simple life. Why? So that I have more to contribute, so that I can contribute towards amplifying and supporting causes that I deeply believe in. And so that is also an important form of self-expression, an important form of serving the world. So there's so many ways that we can engage in this process. Some more classical, and activism doesn't only mean going onto the street or doing political work. I think that that's a very empowering thing to do. And if you've never done it, you should try, because we can't wait for political leaders to become wise. We have to, if you have some wisdom, if you have some insights, share it. Get it out there. Why should wise people keep all of that wealth to themselves? We should not be wisdom capitalists. We should share. So I've had, opportunities, even within the past year with the pandemic, where I was really concerned about the impact of the lockdowns on early childhood, and particularly on staying in front of screens. And so I wrote some letters and I sent them to all the decision makers, to the ministry, to the and I knew I wasn't the only one. I know that there were others doing it. I also contacted journalists and asked them to publish it in the press. And, within some time, it was gratifying to see that that was indeed the direction that things took, that it's important to keep early childhood not online, to keep, as much as possible, to keep the kindergartens open. So it felt empowering. Now, whether or not there was a direct correlation between me writing those particular letters, or if it was just, it was one of the small drops that helped things to move in the right direction. For me, it's a tremendous satisfaction when I feel that I had a voice and that I tried. I did my best, instead of just waiting and hoping that they make the decision which I wish they would make. So I encourage everybody to try and find your voice. Again, just a clarification on the idea of equity. Equity is not equality. Just look at the difference between these two illustrations. So if everybody's given the same size crate to see over the fence, what happens? The person who's tall doesn't even matter, because anyway, he could see over the fence without it. The middle child gets very benefited, but the little one, he still can't see with that height. And so he actually needs extra. The one who's already tall enough doesn't need anything. The middle one was already okay where he was. So, this is where it's important to understand that working for equity isn't the same thing as just equality. It is really being sensitive to what the needs are. Now, there's some problematic parts of this particular illustration. One is like reality, is that the people who need the help the least sometimes seem to have the most extra supports and extra help in life and advantages. And the people who need it the most are in a hole. they're not only do they not have some of the advantages, they're just like even underground. And of course, liberation is like, why do we need to have a fence in the first place? Why is there a fence? So that's like questioning the whole paradigm. Like, why do we need to even make all these supports? Let's just get rid of the fence. So I think that's also quite interesting and insightful. And the other problematic part, though, of this particular illustration is that it implies a bit that some people are inherently less because height isn't something you can change. So a little bit more sensitive metaphor was like, if you are running a racetrack, now the inner lane is shorter actually than the outer lane. So in order to ensure that that some people aren't getting unfairly disadvantaged, like because they're placed on the outer lane, what do they do? In running races, they stagger the starting lines because that has to equal out the differences in the length of the track because of where it is on the inside or the outside. So that's also why sometimes we need to give to make sure that chances, opportunities are evened out, to even out the actual structural inequality. But at the same time, that's not enough. Now, that's why the justice factor comes in, because we have to work on the you could say, causes, not just the effects. And inclusion is about, creating spaces, again, where everybody is able to fully participate. When I was organizing actually workshops on inclusion for teachers, about 100 teachers in Bucharest, and we were trying to find a workshop space, it was so shocking because we were going to have guests who had disabilities and who were going to speak. And they had wheelchairs, some of them. And it was shocking. We had so much difficulty to find a conference space in Bucharest that was accessible for them, that wouldn't put them in a humiliating situation. And sometimes we are not even aware of the types of difficulties they have to face. If there isn't a bathroom that has a wide enough door, they have nowhere to go to the toilet the whole time that they are out. And so they might have to bring like a bottle to pee in if they're male, but that's even more of a disadvantage if you're not male. So this was something I learned from my friend Marius when he talked about how he adapts to school. Because yes, theoretically in Bucharest, people with disabilities cannot be turned away. Practically, how does he get up the stairs? And it's humiliating if somebody has to carry him. He wants to have a dignified life where he can be as independent as possible and not dependent on people that have to, carry his wheelchair up the stairs and things like this. So what kind of adaptations are needed in order for a space to be inclusive? What kinds of hidden barriers do people face? What kind of hidden barriers do women face? Do people from ethnic and religious minorities face? That prevents them from really being truly welcome in a particular space. And how can people who are enjoying relative advantages be sensitive to that and be allies? So again, diversity as a strength. Diversity, not identity, is the law of nature, is one of the spiritual teachings of Anandamurti present in the Ananda Sutram. And he also encouraged the slogan, unity in diversity. So, it's not about being the same. It's about really being able to truly marvel at, appreciate, love the differences that are present in humanity as something that greatly enriches our experience of being a human being, that just adds to it. And this requires not just, again, diversity for a cosmetic purpose, but to truly value the experience of others, to be willing to listen to their experience, to be willing to accept that they might have things that are uncomfortable, and that we should create the space to understand that. I remember walking with, I was with my colleague, Dipani, who was my executive director and a Roma activist, herself Roma, for many years, for about 8 years in Amortel. And we were returning from India. And as we walked through the customs, they stopped us, both of us actually, and asked to look at our bags. And we were tired, it'd been a long trip, but she was so reacted. She was so reacted because she felt she'd been profiled. She was convinced that they'd stopped us because she's Roma And she might have been right. I will never know. We will never know. So, when we got out of the situation, I said, "You're really angry, aren't you?" "Yeah, I am." And she was like, "Yes, I am." I'm da, 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 da. And I gave her space to talk about it and to listen to her with empathy, whether or not objectively either of us could prove, they also stopped me. But it wasn't helpful for me to contradict her experience. What she needed was somebody to be like, that must really feel so frustrating and unfair when you feel that people are targeting you just because you're skin color or because you're Roma, that somehow it means you must have done something sneaky, and they need to check your bags. So that kind of like giving space to let her share with me her feelings, her experience, her frustration, to be supportive, to listen to it. Many times that would have that type of situation happened, and I would encourage her to really share with me how that feels and what can I do and how should I be beside you and what should I say, how can I support you. So diversity is about, how can we develop comfortable, empathetic interactions with people from diverse backgrounds, how to develop comfort and joy with human diversity and form deep and caring connections across all dimensions of human diversity. Well, it means you have to not just socialize with people who look like you, It means that you have to, not only socialize, but also expose your mind to different viewpoints. It can start, like I said, if your socialization is also limited right now because of the pandemic. But, you can listen to influencers who are from minority groups, listen to their point of view, read their opinions. Let your mind just expand by really touching the minds of others who are experiencing life from a completely different perspective, and try to connect to their common humanity, to understand them. Identity, how to construct knowledgeable, confident, individual, personal, and social identities. So, all of this diversity stuff doesn't mean, and Neohumanism doesn't mean that we are going to pretend that we have no cultural baggage with us. Of course we have geo-sentiments, and of course we have socio-sentiments. We wouldn't be human if we didn't have them. Socio-sentiments and even geo-sentiment, they come from a fundamental human need for belonging, for socialization, for feeling that we are part of a community. And that's not a bad thing. That's just part of who we are. So we need to have a solid sense of healthy identity without any inferiority complex or superiority complex, and to develop our self-awareness, confidence, family pride, etc. So how can a strong sense of individual and group identities be healthy? Yeah, they are really necessary for our healthy development psychologically as human beings. They give us a sense of self, of place, of belonging, of confidence. So in child psychology, we see that a child who's had, appropriate parental care, attachment experiences of being bonded with and having their needs met sufficiently, these kids are much more confident to go and explore the world. A child who's never gotten enough of that is clinging, is insecure, cries when there's separation. And that means that it takes a lot more effort for them to go beyond that circle. So if we want people to be able to be comfortable with diversity, to really be allies, etc., you have to have your own identity nice and strong and healthy and clear. You can't deny it or try to erase it. It would be hypocritical. But, that's also a process of recognizing how we are influenced by our unconscious mind, because the way that our geo-sentiments and socio-sentiments are imposed sanskaras on our development means that 90% of that is really unconscious. Most people that participate in forms of structural expressions of sexism, racism. Now, I want to differentiate that, because usually when we think of a racist or a sexist, we have really negative stereotypes about what that person looks like and what they are like. And they're not good. We don't want to be like that. Nor should we want to be like that. But if we are not willing to look at how we ourselves have been affected by growing up in these sexist, racist, etc. social sentiments, those aren't the only social sentiments, cultures, nationalistic cultures, etc., then how can we free ourselves of something that we're not even aware is binding us? The first step is to be aware that you are having some bondages. So, and then we can start working against it. So, for example, an implicit bias is like you may believe that women and men should be equally associated with science, but your automatic associations, your unconscious associations could show that you, like many others, associate men with science more than you associate women with science. So, there are even psychological tests for implicit bias. I could send them to you if you would like, or I'll give them to Krishna Prema to maybe as an experiment this week. But it's very interesting because implicit biases are unconscious. They're deeply embedded. We're not consciously aware of them, but they can determine a lot of our behavior. And they can also determine our behavior in situations where we're under stress, because if we are under stress, we tend to revert more to the shortcuts that biases and stereotypes and prejudice offer. So justice, what is exploitation and how to recognize it? This is also going to come straight out of Liberation of Intellect from Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, or Sri Sri Anandamurti's spiritual name. So a certain group exploits another, and that exploited group in turn exploits a third. So exploitation tends to be a vicious cycle. So when it's like being an abused child, no, it makes it much more likely you yourself will become an abuser. So exploitation functions in a similar way. They're always looking for, it's like once you've been in a powerless position, you want to be powerful. And so when you have the opportunity to be relatively more powerful than someone else, then you might be using the same tactics that were used against you. Psychic exploitation. The base is infusing a fear complex. We are inferior, they are superior. This gets internalized. The people even forget they have rights. This happens all the time. And this is so much more insidious and difficult to remove than the overt types of exploitation. So even when you've done something like freed slaves, no, because that can create such a deep sense of inferiority or such a deep sense of psychic exploitation and fear, that just removing the physical manifestation of it, it still takes generations to heal the consciousness and to create a sense of internal dignity, worth, and, to fully step into power. Psychoeconomic exploitation also depends on injecting complexes. And when it goes even to the political level, well, that's when you start using force or purchasing leadership. So, these things are happening on the international level. And religious exploitation. Unfortunately, a lot of religious sentiments have been used to more easily manipulate and exploit and create different types of complexes, especially during the process of colonization. And so these things are all things we need to learn to recognize so that we can fight the structural embedded forms of injustice and not just superficially do feel-good things about diversity and inclusion that are not challenging those types of issues. Cultural exploitation also is one form of this, and that's where you get pseudo-culture. This really breaks the backbone of a culture because the mind is more easily flowing downward. It's more attractive, it's more juicy, more sexy, to go run after all of those entertaining forms that stimulate our lower propensities rather than elevating forms of culture that might take more mental effort to appreciate or assimilate. So how can we also help to encourage true human culture? So how to overcome exploitation? This is from the Neohumanists. So now we're going to talk about activism, but from a neo-humanist stance. So what are some of the tools that are available to us in neo-humanist philosophy that enhance us as spiritual warriors now to work towards this more just Jedi world? So the first thing is a really firm grounding in Sama Samaja Tattva. Now, not everybody here is a Sanskrit scholar, and that's okay. So what this means is the principle of social equality. So there are two main drivers of human motivation. One is the principle of social equality, which is where you have a firm conviction that everybody is everybody has something internally that is the same, that connects us all, like all members of one family, including plants, animals, the created world, the clouds, the etc. So that means that when I am taking action to consider the universal welfare, what's the opposite of it? The opposite of it is when my decision making, when my desires, etc., are being directed towards my personal fulfillment or the fulfillment of a limited group. Now, what that limited group can be my religion, my nation, my gender, but it could also be human beings. No, so if I'm only thinking for human beings, I'm not able to fully work for justice and to overcome exploitation, because I have to keep expanding my mind to really think what is in the best welfare of all. And this, another fancy term, Proto-Psycho Spirituality, what does this mean? This doesn't imply a particular spiritual path, but what it does imply is that essential to developing that kind of inclusive spirit, of that big mind of thinking for the welfare of all, that's a spiritual realization. And so it needs to move from just being an inspiring theory, a nice idea, to actually lighting a flame. And that flame in the beginning is flickering. And that flickering of the flame is the proto. That proto means the first movement. It's something in movement. A flickering flame is moving. It's not steady, but it's moving. As that flame becomes steady, it starts to become psychic. Means it is entering into your psyche. It's getting firmly embedded there. It's becoming a principle that guides you in all types of situations. And then it leads you towards spirituality, the feeling of unity, the realization of unity. It's not just a principle. It becomes for you the mission of your life, to create this divinity on earth, to be a channel for that, to work for that, to unite everyone. And the activist stance, to be ready to take up action. No, don't just, there's this idea like procrastination is good if it stops you from doing something harmful. But if you understand something positive to do, mobilize yourself and do it as soon as possible. Don't wait for others to do it. The revolutionary spirit is shatter this bond of limitation. Evolution is like, everything can be done gradually. Why hurry so much? Reactionaries, how can I contradict the way my ancestors, my father, my grandfather did things? That's the fear of change, no? So that's actually holding things back. So as much as possible, for developing that Shakta spirit, for really developing that, you need to awaken your revolutionary spirit. And another few expressions of this are just here to differentiate two important aspects that you can take in your Jedi work. Is one, a very easy way to summarize it that P.R. Sarkar gave was, I will not exploit anybody and I will not allow myself to be exploited. No, so those are the two sides of the coin. So the first one's called resistance. I won't allow anyone to exploit me. Anytime a person stands up against poor treatment of themselves or members of their own group. But an ally is, on the other hand, anytime a person stands up against the poor treatment of members of another group. And why are you doing that? It's not your problem, is it? Well, is it? It is your problem. Anytime that there is poor treatment of somebody for any reason, because of a group association, it actually makes the safety go down for everybody. Nobody feels safe. Nobody feels comfortable then. And liberating any group is liberating everyone to everyone, because it allows us to be more fully human. Even if we ourselves are in one of the dominant groups who is oppressing a minority group, it's limiting our humanness. We feel shame, discomfort, disconnect with the groups, with the members of that group. And so when we stand beside them, help to liberate them, and are their amplifiers, their allies, then we are also freeing our humanity and the humanity of even the people that are oppressing them more fully. And just in this process, make sure, ask what they want you to do and how you can help. Don't presume. Presumption is going to be, again, putting yourself in a superior position, right? And so that's, again, going to trigger, the feeling of powerlessness in the person you're actually trying to empower. So don't presume. Ask them what they want you to do. How can they help? And if you're in your own identity group, act, at least to get them to question the behavior. Means, you know, you're a guy and people are making sexist jokes, but it's just guys. Don't be tolerant of that. Kind of be intolerant of intoleration, you know. And if you're white and people are saying some kind of ethnic joke about somebody who is from a different ethnic group, you know, don't laugh, don't participate. Like, correct that. That's one way that we can really awaken this awareness. So my other aspect was, there was a couple of you that are not spiritual practitioners, but you might be activists. So the other side of this coin is that, you know, Jedis also get burned out. If you saw the latest Star Wars movies, we had a Luke Skywalker who was originally, you know, such a great warrior, and he'd become kind of like burned out, you know, and pessimistic and didn't want to join the fight anymore. So how do we also prevent burnout? Because changing the world, pretty big task, and it's going to take a long-term persistence and determination to be able to do that. And so in order to have that resiliency, you know, this is where we need to have the ability to connect to a source of inspiration that is perennial, that nourishes us from within, and that continuously gives us that feeling of love, which should be the motivation behind our social change work. You could be motivated by anger as well, but anger is like a fire and it burns. You hold on to anger too long, it's like you're holding on to a hot coal to throw it at somebody, right? Who gets burned? You get burned, you know? So anger can be a motivator, but it's one that's a bit more dangerous and leads a bit more towards, you know, and it can be a healthy anger too, because sometimes anger can be very righteous and it can get you moving, you know, it can get that shakta moving. But ultimately, you know, the more nourishing sentiment is to really come out of a deep sense of love and compassion for all, you know, and a sense of justice that is deeply embedded in Dharma. So this is my message to you. Be the change you wish to see in the world. And be active. Have the confidence to stand up for yourself and for others in the face of bias. And be empowered to act with others or alone against prejudice or discriminatory actions. So this is my question for you now. I would like to encourage you to write it in the chat, or we'll just open it up, maybe without the chat. So what kinds of concrete change am I inspired to be part of to create a more just world? So concrete change, you know, many times people would all be vying for the attention of our founder, of our guru, of Sri Sri Anandamurti, and they would wait, you know, to have this opportunity to go and have a personal contact with him, to receive wisdom for their lives. So many times he repeated the message, do something concrete for suffering humanity, and to be great by your sadhana, by your sacrifice, and by your service. And so these messages, I think, really are a challenge. They're a challenge for us to not sit, to really take ourselves out of our comfort zones, to challenge ourselves, because that challenge is what takes us into the learning zone. It takes us into the, did I stop my share? Into the zone of growth and transformation, right? So we need to, if we want to be evolving spiritually, we need to be challenging ourselves to go beyond that staticity of the comfort zone. And one of the best ways for doing that is find a way to contribute to society. It will have a benefit for the world, and it will also mobilize your latent potentiality. It will make you more alive and more full of zeal and more full of shakta. So that's my message for all of you for today. And I invite you now to share your thoughts.
You can, excuse me, you can either type in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself, and we'll deal with cacophony. And
well, maybe raise your hand. I think raising your hand.
Oh, raise your hand. That's a good idea. Then I can choose. Yeah.
I do like it when people type in the chat, because then we can see if there's if I have further, if it's something easy to answer. Or...
Yeah, that's true. And it might be easier from other languages.
Let's see what's already in the chat too. So I practice spirituality regularly, but I do not participate in social activism. Working to improve the world. So let's see.
You're catching up on chats from
They were the
early
beginning.
part. Yeah.
So simplify to amplify. You want to say more on that? What did you mean?
Oh, well, that was something you said, actually.
Did I really?
Yeah, you didn't say it quite that way, but you were saying live a simpler lifestyle so you can amplify your effect.
Oh,
that you have the resources to amplify others elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that sometimes this is a principle that in the yogic values, it's called aparigraha. And it literally means living a simple life. It's like, how do we, because people might think, oh, but I'm not rich enough to contribute to social causes. I don't have enough. But, what could you simplify in your life so that you could? Because it's an attitude. It's not a question of having enough resources. It's your attitude towards your resources. And I learned that from Indian villagers. When I went to India to a village to visit, and I found that these were people who, by Western standards, had nothing. They were living without electricity, in mud houses, extremely simple. Every single person, as we walked through the village, had to offer me something, offered me a gift, flowers, water, banana trunk, murti, which is like puffed rice. Whatever they had, they wanted to give a gift. And so the ability to give a gift is from the heart. It's not from the amount of resource we have. But we do have to make decisions, priorities. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, we have more to offer. Okay, so somebody will need to translate.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to be translating and I copied the Vietnamese. It says he's apologizing, he needs to leave soon.
Okay, no problem. Whoever needs to leave, I suppose, should do so. Because this is more the open-ended part.
Yeah.
How much more time? Are we over time?
Let's see. We have about 15 minutes total, but some of that is typically announcements. So there's time for questions, or we could end a little early, depending.
Anybody? So, I asked you guys a question. I would love to hear from each of you. What is something that you could do as small of a step as feels like safe for you to go out of your comfort zone, but enough that it is taking you into a learning zone and it's challenging you to go past some fear? Yeah, so I'd really like to hear from each participant. I'd like to hear something that you could do that would be new for you, that would be maybe a little bit challenging, a little bit pushing the envelope. But what can you do after listening to this? I'd like to see how you would like to take some type of engagement to do something concrete. Yeah? Not just to listen, but to actually do something. What could it be? Contribute money to at least one or more organizations working to change the world. Yeah, shameless self-promotion. You don't know where to contribute. You can contribute to Amortel Romania. We're helping kids. You don't know where. You can type in Karun for them, my website, amortel.ro. So /en for the English version. We need support. So, and many organizations need support. We can't do the work that we do without the people that are able to support it. So create a workshop here in my community to talk about Neohumanism. Yay, Krishna Prema, you have just been getting more and more bold, I think, in your ideas and willingness to do stuff. So living simply that others may simply live is one of my motivations. I am strengthening my spiritual practice at present time. I contribute money to AM projects. Great. Okay. Anything you'd like to do for your community more directly than just for the AM projects around the world, like maybe something a bit more local in your local community? Something that maybe stretches you? It's really amazing, like how every time that I have listened to, I'll share some spiritual experiences now while I'm waiting for some more feedback. So I remember as an LFT, the first time I read The Liberation of Intellect, it deeply inspired me. And there was something in there which, as I was reading it, I got the feeling that religions should be working towards the same goal, but they're not. They've become antagonistic to each other, and there should be more interreligious dialogue. And so I came back home with that inspiration, and I thought, I want to create some type of dialogue. I mean, I was extremely, in a way, naive, but I'd also read a book by Dada Dharmavedananda, Who's Afraid of the Tantric Guru. And again, he would just have some dharmic inspiration and take a step, and grace and magic and miracles would happen. And so I just started to make some phone calls. And like the third person that I called, first people were kind of like, yeah, who are you? But the third person I called said, it is really amazing that you are calling me right now, because I am, and I was calling from the phone book. Like, these were not people I knew. No, I just called out of the blue. And she's like, right now, I've got in front of me the invitation for an Earth Day interreligious conference. It sounds like exactly what you're talking about. You should be there. You should be on the organizing committee. And so like that, I, as this young LFT, got myself landed on the organizing committee of an Earth Day interreligious interfaith event. And we, and I spoke on a panel with other religious leaders, and we had our stand, and it was great. It was really wonderful. I sang kirtan. I introduced kirtan during the ending program to like 500 people, even kind of off key. So it was very empowering, and the magic that happened there has happened repeatedly since then. That was the first experience, and it gave me confidence that if I get a calling from within to do something that is really beneficial for like a big vision, a big dream, to take a step, because when you take that step, the energy comes, and he helps you. He gets excited, I think, and he starts to send all kinds of like serendipitous magic your way. So don't be afraid. Like, even if it sounds a bit crazy, it was a little bit crazy to like just pick up a phone book. You don't have phone books anymore, but we had phone books then, like, and start calling people randomly out of the blue. But that type of divine craziness sometimes attracts grace. All right, so I am working towards sharing meditation and yoga with my local community. Nice. Prakash says, lead a Tools for Change the World studies circle with people beyond those on my spiritual path. Yeah, great. Excellent. When I was an LFT, also Maitri Erson and her husband were organizing workshops on voluntary simplicity, and they were so powerful for me. They were not with Ananda Margis, but they were like really deeply going into the principle of parigraha. They are the ones who've founded the Kailash Eco Village. So I'm working towards sharing meditation and yoga with my community. I'm involved in a wonderful yoga center and community, building confidence and inspiration. I also love to share my enthusiasm for, you left us on a cliffhanger there. Vegetarian cooking. Yeah, why not? Didi A.Devapriya, who some of you might know, who is running the Abba Light Center in Africa for a number of years. Well, she was working in Malta before that. And her big project, her inspiration was, I will bring vegetarianism to Malta. And so she started the first vegetarian society in Malta and helped to connect vegetarians to have more of a voice in Malta, no? So, those types of, I thought that was so, she inspired me. Like, she's just one of the Didis that really inspired me, because just that kind of boldness, like, I'm going to bring vegetarianism to a whole country. I'm going to bring homeopathy to Africa. I'm going to, make homeopathy accessible to rural African, villages where they have no resources. I love that. I mean, I think that that's the type of thing that really attracts an enormous flow of grace, to just have that boldness of vision, like, don't limit yourself. Somebody challenged me when I came to Romania. We were waiting overnight in an airport, and she said to me, are you really happy just running a school and a children's home? Is that all you can do with your potential? You Didis and Dadis, you should be doing more. You should do more. You should change the whole educational system of Romania. Don't just, run a school. And I was like, oh God, you're right. And so from there, I started to write a curriculum and submit it to the Ministry of Education, started to engage in dialogue with the different ministries of education. I mean, it's still an ongoing process, but even that dialogue has had influence on the national curriculum, because when the last version of it came out, I mean, I went and I talked to one of the ministers of education who is dedicated to early childhood, and she read our curriculum, and she was kind of challenging us, like, oh, it's nice, but what's really innovative or new here? It sounds like a lot of progressive ideas. And she said, what do you really want to do differently? I'm like, there's way too much focus on academics. There should be more focus on the inner, development of the child, and, more on, like, values through stories and things like this. Well, when she was interviewed by a journalist about a year later, and they were introducing a new version of the curriculum on the national level, guess what she said? When they said, what's innovative about this new curriculum? Well, there's been too much emphasis on academics, and we're going to put more emphasis on values and stories. And I was like, I can't believe it. It was like almost exactly what I said to her. And I thought, she for sure doesn't even remember that. I mean, like, that's like probably went into the subconscious mind and was like combined with maybe stuff other people said to her. But, you know, I was one of the people that said it to her. So it was super, you know, it just encouraged me again, like, we should step into these spaces. We should step into advocacy spaces where we go and we talk with decision makers and policymakers, and not just limit ourselves to changing, I don't know, like to just one school or something. It's great to have a school, great to have something concrete, but if we're not using it to influence public policy, we are not fully leveraging the full potential of that. We need to like make sure that educational change reaches all children. So even though I felt like a failure on one level because this communist guy blocked our ability, like he was like, well, who do you think you are to come to the Romanian government with a curriculum? I suppose you think you're a Maria Montessori, but I doubt it. He was so awful to us. And he was just like, you know, the type of communist bureaucrat that is waiting for big bribes is the word on the street from other alternatives. You don't get past him without several thousands and thousands of euros of, you know, of bribe. And I wasn't in a position or of a mentality to do that. So on one level, I feel like I failed in that mission, and on another level, I feel like I haven't, because by having to, you know, have those dialogues and get our neo-humanist curriculum read by all the top decision makers in the Romanian educational system, you know, they try to neutralize us by taking on some of our ideas so that we are not so relevant. They can say, you're not different than us. So, you know, it's an interesting dialogue. Let's see, I think that some more came in. Okay, so I see also somebody want to work with the local recovery community. That's an excellent community to serve. Really needs service. Also prisons, you know, I mean, these are people that are just being thrown away by society. And one of the instructions in spirituality is like give, you know, sing kirtan all the time, etc. But also give respect to those that nobody respects, and nobody respects people in prisons. So if you can also do that, it's wonderful. Or people that are in recovery, kind of similar, because they're also seen as criminals in a way. Not always, depends if they're just alcoholic, that's like socially acceptable. But if they're a junkie or something, then they're often, you know, in a very difficult, marginalized role. So can we create study circles in PLT just to focus and develop some laws found in Prout? For example, a civil code constitution. Every week the circle will study for 5 or 10 points. Every person next week will come back with the same point changed in a Prout way. Suppose that we started with 10 people. Every weekend we would have 10 new points for civil code, 40 points in a month, in a semester, 240 with 10 persons. And Margie's data, we can create some documents that can be useful for next generation. Or also with the Didi. Imagine we can have more than one study circle and focus once a week on that topic. Can we consider action like that? Of course, that's activism. Absolutely. Good job, Krishna Mish. Yes, that's definitely activism of the best kind. Education, activism without education is very superficial. No, I mean, like, education is educating. Like, you know, a democracy does not work without an educated public. You really need to spend time helping people to understand, you know, what is exploitation, things like this. If you guys haven't read it, I think activist reading fundamental, you know, syllabus is start with Paulo Freire and really read Pedagogy of the Oppressed. You know, it's such an important document for anybody who's working in social change work about empowering and giving voice to the people who are oppressed. So whenever you meet government officials in Romania or other groups, do you wear your Acharya uniform? Depends. No, not if I'm going to the Ministry of Education, I don't. I feel that that would add an extra barrier to me being accepted for, you know, for it just to be seen then as some kind of religious fanatic thing. You know, they're very orthodox here, not very religiously diverse, not very open to religious diversity. So no, I go in nice civil dress, you know, wearing like the equivalent of a suit and tie for a woman, but like, you know, nice civil dress so that I will not be marginalized by my appearance, so that my ideals will be given credit on the merit of the ideas, not on how weird or not weird I look. If they dig into my social media, though, they would figure that out pretty quickly. And I think that they sometimes have done that because I'm on TV and stuff in uniform. So, it's not a big secret, but I don't draw attention to it if I'm in a civil networking position. But it depends. When I go to early childhood education conferences, I go with orange because it's a conversation opener. It attracts people. I don't wear the veil, but I do go in orange, and it does attract a lot of conversation. And it also makes me easy to find. So if people are like, oh, that orange woman, it has an advantage. It's like a bright light.
One of my friends talks about meeting the orange people when she was younger.
Yeah, exactly. So, and sometimes that has negative, sometimes people associate that with like Rajneesh or other gurus. So, but yeah, it's at least a curiosity thing. And so really, I try to listen to my inner guidance on that. I don't have a rigid one-size-fits-all response to that. It really depends on the situation, who I'm going to be talking to, how likely it is that my appearance could potentially create a barrier to listening to the ideas and giving them credibility. In some cases, it'll give extra credibility. And I think that's the idea of wearing uniform. Just by wearing uniform, if people are looking to us for spiritual guidance, when we're wearing uniform, we have extra credibility just from this dress. But if we're in some other situations, it can be problematic. Ideally would be that, you've got other people in society that you can work with and send as your frontline people when you need to do networking or political work. But sometimes we don't have that luxury. Okay, you guys can unblock your microphones, if there's any other comments people want to chime in.
Didi, this is Twarita, and just wanted to say namaskar and thank you so much for your talk. It's so expressive, wonderful, and anyway, it was just it was great. It was very informative. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you. Well, you will inspire me if any of you want to send me some. If you decide to do some action that stretches you out of your comfort zone and you want some a recognition for that, I would be totally inspired if somebody sends me after listening, I went out and I did this. And sometimes we need also to support each other in taking those steps. So feel free to inspire me if you actually do something new and that stretches you after this. Because it's always nice to feel that, inspiration can translate into action.
Thank you, Didi. So inspiring today. I really appreciate you doing this. It's a fantastic workshop.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And everyone that attended, we appreciate you coming to our workshops. For me, I said, I've actually taken a course with Didi with Neohumanism, and fantastic course. She did an incredible job. But even today, I even feel more inspired. I'm ready to go do some action right now. So even though it's only 6 o'clock in the morning here, but it's always time for that. So thank you so much. And I think we are at our closing. So that is, our time is up, and we will have Didi back. And we I just appreciate so much. It says, another inspiring morning from Didi and PLT. Thank you, Bhupesh. And we have another thank you. I vow to move forward with my positive endeavors. Great, Fija. And so we do have a poll before everybody, if you guys still have a moment before you leave. And one quick announcement, next week for our Planetary Workshop, we'll have Dada Navahalanda here again, and we will have The Future of Intelligence Part 3.